Good morning, friends. Thanks for tuning in. We are here on a continuation on history and geographics about Paraguay, more history about the war, so I hope you stay tuned. We are having such a beautiful morning here in the middle of nowhere in the wild of the Chaco, Paraguay. There's a lot of history in Paraguay. We are here at a very nice place. I haven't been in there yet, but we're going to go right away. But without further ado, my brother-in-law Bert, who has a bachelor's in history. So Bert, thanks for being with us again, and I'm looking forward to see what you have to tell us today.
Thanks for another opportunity to share some of our beautiful places here in Paraguay that are actually not very visited. We are here at Campo Villa, which is for the history of the Chaco War, it is a very important place because here around 8,000 Bolivian soldiers surrendered to Paraguayans who actually formed a circle and that way thirsted them out, so to say, until they had to surrender. Now, so that you guys are not totally lost, I'll give you a brief flash of what the Chaco War was. 1932 to 1935, Paraguay and Bolivia had a war where the main terrain they were fighting about was this no man's land, as I call it, the Chaco. Why? Because the Paraguay River, which goes to the Paraná, which goes to the Atlantic, was one of the main goals of Bolivia, who had lost their access to the Pacific Ocean because via the Paraguay River they could get to the Atlantic Ocean. So they wanted to occupy the Chaco to get that access to the Atlantic Ocean. There were a few other issues like border lines which weren't defined like in most of the countries which were Spanish colonies in the colonial period. And there also were issues about oil companies looking for crude oil here. One was the Standard Oil from the US and the other was the Royal Dutch Shell, which are both well known. So the war had actually three big phases. In the beginning it was that Bolivia had way more soldiers. They had a proper war school. Their general in command was Hans Kunt, a former World War I vet from Prussia. The first lapse is called like the Paraguayan offensive, where the very harsh battle of Boquerón took place. 20 days of battling where the Paraguayans went victorious. And actually it lifted their morale because it was very low after the Triple Alliance War. Then comes the second phase, which is from us here to the south in Nanagua, it's called, where the Paraguayans actually had to go into defense. Two battles there. One was coincidentally on the 4th of July, and where they could reject the Bolivians. And the third one actually starts with the Paraguayan persecution of the Bolivians back to Bolivia where they came from, and it actually starts here where we are now in Campo Villa with the surrender of around 8,000, some say 7,500, some say 8,000 Bolivians. Okay, another reason that Bolivia invaded the Chaco was that their main goal was to become an industrial nation, and therefore they needed to have a port and access to an ocean, which they lost in the War of the Pacific. In the War of the Pacific, Bolivia confronted Peru and Chile because of access to the Pacific, and they lost all of their access they had to an ocean. So Paraguay and Bolivia are the only countries in Paraguay nowadays that are Mediterranean. Bolivia's troops invaded Paraguay already since the 1900s, the beginning of the 1900s, and they came far along, actually almost to Asunción, a few hundreds of kilometers away. And that was actually the purpose. They wanted to invade and occupy the Chaco so that they could own the Rio Paraguay and therefore have an access to the Atlantic Ocean. Crude oil, as I said, was an issue too here in the Chaco War. The Standard Oil from the US and the Royal Dutch, what we know nowadays as the Shell, those two companies were involved in this war. And there's a very interesting story about a senator, a US senator called Huey Long. There's a dirt road here in the Chaco close to this site. It's called Picada Mr. Long. And there's a street in Asunción that is called Avenida Senador Long. Why? Huey Long had experienced an abuse of the Standard Oil in the state where he was senator, where they had expropriated farmers from their land just to build oil wells. He had claimed that in Washington, but Washington didn't want to hear him, so he went himself to Washington wanting to present his point again, and battle against this war because he protested against the Standard Oil. He wanted the government to do something against the Standard Oil because the Standard Oil funded in some ways with artillery and other things this war. When he came to Washington, the next day he wanted to present his points in the Senate. He was killed the day before, and afterwards they found out that a medic student actually killed him, and he was contracted from someone else. So Huey Long is actually a hero in Paraguay because he protested in the US against this war, and he protested against big corporate businesses like the Standard Oil, for example, who actually did dirty businesses around the world funding wars that had nothing to do with the US, killing innocent people actually, so to say. The third phase starts here, exactly where we are now, in Campo Villa. Campo Villa means a field where there's a path that divides into two paths. Dividing road, we would say too. What happened in Campo Villa? In Campo Villa, the technique of Hans Kunt, which was the former World War I vet I told you about, who was the chief commandant of the Bolivians, wanted to confront the Paraguayans in a frontal offensive, and the Paraguayans under the leader and the chief commandant, Lieutenant Colonel José Félix Estigarribia, preferred to encircle them. And that was a technique they used a lot because Estigarribia had studied also in Europe, in France. He had went to war school. He knew the techniques and the tactics that the Europeans used. The Chaco is a region where the tactic of the frontal offensive doesn't work very well because we have a lot of bush here, a lot of savanna. So what he did is he encircled them, and he actually, so to say, starved them to death, or he cut off their water supplies, their food supplies, even the telephone wires he cut off. He cut off all he closed all the roads where the trucks, the T4s, had to get waters from far away. And two divisions, the 4th and the 9th Division, under Hans Kunt's officers Peñaranda and Banzer, had to surrender here then. And there's a very interesting story to that. The Paraguayans called this circle the Corralito. Mariscal Estigarribia barely got to close one circle. He sends a telegram with, the idea was that the Bolivians catch that telegram, and on that telegram it said, we have closed the 3rd circle. In reality, they only closed one circle, barely. In the attempt of escape of 2 Bolivian soldiers, in that exact moment where they actually broke through the lines, there were around 4 to 5 Paraguayan soldiers that were on patrol and exactly found them trying to escape. So they took them as prisoners, and then the rumor went around that the 3 circles that Mariscal Estigarribia talked about really existed, although they were fake. And it's very interesting, this place, because they surrendered without a big battle here. Paraguay was able to get 7,000 weapons here. The one you see, this kind you see here, which is the Mauser. The Mauser is a very effective weapon. It was used a lot during World War I and World War II. The Paraguayan weapon was made, the Paraguayan Mauser was made in Spain, and the Bolivian one in the Czech Republic, but they had the same ammunition. So it was a very big victory for Paraguay because 7,000 of these they could capture. They could capture 500 mortars, artillery, they could capture a lot of trucks too. So as you see here, and I want to mention this with a reason, you see here some antiques, and this here is Coronel Rafael Franco, which was one of the biggest leaders in the defeat in Campo Villa. The Mausers that Paraguay got from Spain were also known in Paraguay as Mata Paraguayos. That means Paraguayan killer. That was because this part of the rifle was very long, and so it got very hot and it bent down, and a lot of soldiers died because the whole thing exploded when they held it like this if the thing went down. So they call this Mata Paraguayos. This is a real replica from then. This is from the war. It says here, here's a place where you can find it. Here it says República del Paraguay, which means Republic of Paraguay. And here it says 1932, a model of 1932. So between the two world wars. Mr. Peter Tufts is the owner of this. He found all these artifacts around here in the bushes. He found the people here that gave him these things, and he bought these things and actually maintained them too. And guess what? We're gonna try one of these in a real trench of the Chaco War. Mr. Tufts gathered here artifacts like, for example, this. You will wonder what this is. This is a casserole where on each side one soldier had to grab this, and full of food, they went amongst the trenches and served food to the soldiers. So this is actually something very precious, and he's got a lot of precious things here, which I will show you in the museum. So Peter Tufts, in a private initiative, he gathered a lot of information of war vets that actually fought here at Campo Villa. For example, Don Andrés Silva, which was on the picture, and himself is on the picture, Coronel Rafael Franco, and a few others here. He also gathered a lot of artifacts around here, like, for example, bombs, cannon bombs. This, for example, are bombs that were thrown out of airplanes. He gathered old cartridges, for example. A lot of them came like this for the Mausers. A lot of grenades. Some of them actually are, I think, are hot still, but people around here don't worry about that a lot. A lot of very precious stuff he got here. For example, this, the real shovel with which the Paraguayan soldiers had to make hundreds of kilometers of trenches in the Chaco ground, which is very, very hard. And it's actually a very big merit, something very big he did, something huge for Paraguay, because the government is actually not present here. I have to be honest about that. Here, for example, he has a very interesting antique. It says here, Cervecería Nacional Asunción. That would be like National Beer Brewing Company. What is so interesting is that here is that on the label you see the Star of David. And that's very interesting because some people say that the first owners of the Paraguayan Brewery Company were Jews, which I'm not certain of. I would have to research on that. But it's very interesting. And Mr. Tufts does not sell these things. So you can come here and promise him a lot of money. He won't give you anything. He says these things belong to this place and they have to stay here. This is what the actual Mauser gun that the soldiers used looked like. It had 5 rounds. It had a bayonet, which was very often used. You guys know that from war history. And some of them also had a magazine. This one does not have. It has a very simple way of using. Now this gun, I don't know when it was cleaned or used the last time, so we won't try this one today. But this one here is a little bit modified. This one I know for sure that it works very well. Okay, this one has a very simple way of managing perfectly, and this was actually cut off there because it had a very long end, and when they shot a lot it got very hot and people could hurt themselves with that. So let's try this one. Fire in the hole. As you can see behind me, we have here a few original trenches from the Chaco War, actually closed from the rains and so on, but they're original still. And to proceed from Campo Villa on, the pursuit of the Paraguayans to the Bolivians from December 1933 was actually constant. Through all of the harsh regions of the Chaco, they pursued them up to Villamontes in the north, defeating them once more in Cañada El Carmen, and taking around 7,000 Bolivian soldiers as prisoners. And from there on, actually from 1934 on, there was a big pursuit from both sides to somehow try to get over with the war and make a peace treaty. In the back of me you see the original roads of the Chaco War. This is where they drove with their Ford T4s, 40 kilometers an hour maximum, maybe 60 That's very fast. Going hundreds of kilometers just to see if the front is doing well. As you will see, the roads are very winding, because the main goal of that was that the airplanes couldn't pursue them and couldn't shoot them down then. So from 1934 on, from December 1933, as I said, there was a constant pursuit of the Bolivians. In 1934, there will be the big defeat of the Bolivians in Cañada el Carmen. They will once again take 7,000 Bolivian soldiers, capture them. From 1935 on, the 12th of June, was the protocol of the Chaco peace. That was actually a status quo where they finished fighting. And then they worked on the peace treaty till the 21st of July 1938, where they then finally signed the peace treaty of the Chaco War. In 2008, the president of Paraguay, Fernando Lugo, and the president of Argentina, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, and the president of Bolivia, Evo Morales, signed the last Chaco peace treaty, with which they finished the final chapter of the Chaco War, and with that act they actually put the book of the cruel Chaco War and put it behind us and the people of Paraguay. Yeah, the relationship is actually very friendly nowadays between both nations, Bolivia as Paraguay. There are several peace treaties that they made, there are treaties on different bases that they made, and there's even an international highway uniting both, the highway number 9, Carlos Antonio López Ruta Trans-Chaco, that goes from Asunción all the way to Infante Rivarola, which is the borderline with Bolivia. It's actually not well maintained, but it is one access that unifies both countries. This place here in the wilderness was actually for 80 years untouched. That's why you can find a lot of things like this tree. For example, you can find places where projectiles have entered and left, or where they just have entered, like here for example too. It looks a little bit like it has maybe gone across it. You can find a lot of trees like this one. This is a so-called ink tree, because they used the wood to make ink of it. That's actually some things you can find here. You can also find a lot of cartridges from the war itself. So come here and visit this place, and if you're lucky, you can find your own things, antiques of the war.
I was very fascinated about all the info, all the stories and all the stuff I learned about the Chaco. It's a very beautiful place, and I thank you very much for being part of this video, for all the info.
Thanks a lot, it was an honor.
Who's that guy?
It's actually the unknown soldier.
Cool. I guess every country has it, right?
That's right.
Awesome. Okay, with this we're gonna wrap out our history on the Chaco, Paraguay. I sincerely hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. And as always, stay cool, be awesome, and do good. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Smokes! That was loud.
Whoa! Good one.
Rambo.